So my name is Charlie Tebow. I am a missing youth specialist with child welfare and do a lot of work with foster care. I am also a survivor of human sex trafficking.
I'm Melissa Deal, and I am currently involved with Veronica's Voice as their community liaison. I work with some of the girls in the house. Like on Mondays, we have meetings, and it's kind of like sister time, so we can kind of share our shared experiences and heal from those together. So that's currently a little bit of what I'm doing. I have my hands in a lot of different pots within the organization. So.
Currently, I work with Rediscover, and the work that I provide are services to our homeless community, as well as those that are encountering mental health and substance abuse crisis. So what we do is we connect them to services. We have about a 23-hour turnaround expectation for our program. So they get brought in either by police, EMS, or referred over to us by the hospital. Our goal is to kind of alleviate some of the pressures that the hospital and the police officers and fire department and such feel from people using services for inappropriate needs. So oftentimes the homeless community or someone in a substance abuse or mental health crisis might call 911 when what they actually need is connection to case management or medication services or possibly just a housing placement.
I'm Executive Director of Veronica's Voice. It's a nonprofit in Kansas City that exists to empower women to exit from commercial sexual exploitation and to address the issues that leave people vulnerable to a point where they have no other choice, and also to address demand.
My name is Lena Romana. I am a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation and am assigned to the Kansas City field office here in Kansas City, Missouri. I have been an agent for almost 15 years and the entire time have been assigned to Kansas City. Currently, I am assigned to investigate human trafficking matters, which means that I initiate, investigate, and follow through court adjudications with the cases that I have.
My name is Jennifer Green, and I am the Clinical Forensic Care Program Manager for St. Luke's Health System. As a manager of the forensic program, I am responsible for providing some guidance to our both internal and external staff on medical, clinical forensic care of our patients who have experienced different forms of violence. That can include our patients who have experienced and have presented with a complaint of sexual assault, domestic or intimate partner violence, elder abuse or vulnerable adult abuse, child abuse, physical assaults, and human trafficking.
My name is September Tribble. I'm with the Stop Trafficking Project, and what we focus on is bringing adults from awareness to action and empowering our kids so that they can be safer.
Commercial sexual exploitation is the buying and selling of sexual activity that relies on the exploitation of another person.
In 2019, the National Human Trafficking Hotline received 48,326 calls for service, and 14,597 victims of sex trafficking were identified.
I am motivated by helping people, whether that is a child that has been abused or put in a situation where they have become a victim, or an adult that has been taken advantage of and become a victim of human trafficking. Over the course of the years, that has included more than just human trafficking victims and victims of any type of criminal matter. What motivates me is seeing justice done.
My motivation for my work and my passion comes from the patients that I take care of. No question about it. When I get to witness firsthand the bravery that it takes to come forward and disclose or to share with another person what they've experienced when it comes to abuse and violence, I am in absolute awe, and that is the fuel that provides me the strength that I need to continue in this line of work.
I am motivated to do this because I know my own personal story and how long it took me to talk to someone, but I also am seeing such an issue with our kids. We are in an unprecedented time of internet use, which can be great. Technology is wonderful until it's not. And so we're finding that predators are trying to access our kids online, and that online enticements are accelerating, and that we have now had an increase of 98% when it comes to that. So what we want to do is not just try to give help and triage after someone has been victimized, but we would like to prevent that victimization from ever happening or catch it really quickly.
Working with victims has impacted my life in a positive way, because it's allowed me to take all that pain and hurt and anger and take that back into myself and use it as fuel. So it's that fire that stays in my belly that knows that I have to, for the rest of my days, I have to be there to try to be a sunlight or a connection to other people to make healing for themselves. One thing that's kind of been on my soul and my heart recently is that oftentimes when we're stuck in those positions, we learn the ability and we think we no longer have the right to have a dream for ourselves because we're told we're not worthy. And so we stop thinking we can have something else. And so I think one of the most important things is to allow somebody to dream again, to teach them how to dream, to let them know they're worthy of a dream. I don't care if that dream is just going to school. I was 25 years past high school before I decided to go back. And it was knowing that I wanted to help others, but wanting to make sure I had appropriate skills. Because the first thing that I think a lot of survivors do as a mistake, they want to go back and help people, but they kind of try to force them into the same way they healed. And I had to break free from that. And so I enrolled in college as again, 25 years post high school, very dyslexic, was not given a lot of inspiration when I was a child, and did no longer dream for myself. And so it was, other people encouraged me and helped walk me through that process, and so it just kind of kept building up. So each time I'm able to connect with a survivor, I don't care if it's as simple as that person had one moment of a day and I got to buy them a cup of coffee and they felt special in that moment, or if it's the one who's, now stepped into peer counseling and I don't care what level it is of success that they've had, celebrate that level of success, because that's what I get from it, is just knowing that success and knowing that there is a brighter future for them, and that once they make that first step forward, then the world is just kind of open to them and everything looks new.
Challenges that we have within the sexual assault nurse examiner realm, I think primarily is that this is not easy work to do. When we're sitting there working with an individual and we are listening to everything that they've experienced, the trauma, the terror, all that emotion, and we're sharing in that emotion with that individual, it can really be heavy. And so making sure that we are processing that vicarious trauma, that secondary trauma that we're playing witness to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves and being healthy about the way that we're taking care of ourselves, balancing out our lives, making sure that we're getting what we need to take care of ourselves, because if we can't take care of ourselves, then it makes it even harder to take care of other people. So I think one of the biggest challenges is just the exposure to trauma over and over and over again, especially with our full-time employees, that this is what they do. Every day that they go into work, they are working with people and listening to these really intense, heavy experiences, and then having to process that.
Self-care is very important for those of us who are advocates in the anti-trafficking world, and that boils down to really making healthy choices, whether that is physical health of eating healthy, having rest and regular exercise and sunshine, or whether that is our intellectual health of making sure to study and learn as much as we can, our emotional health, making sure that we have good boundaries and healthy relationships. And then there's the fun things like, taking a little vacation, getting away, having times of relaxation, maybe going out to eat or shopping. But I think it's very important to make the distinction that self-care is not always some fun activity that we do. It's the day in, day out regular activities that we have to maintain our health and our wellness.
I write. I read every piece of literature I can get my hands on. I spend time with my children and my husband.
Research indicates the size of the commercial sex economy in the major U.S. cities ranges from an estimated $39 million to $290 million per year.
Buyers are often referred to as Johns and fuel the demand. A buyer exchanges something of monetary value for sex and sex act. Buyers represent all ages and demographics. Research indicates that 14 to 21% of men will buy sex in their lifetime.
Of the customers, they look at that situation as this is two consenting adults and it's not a problem, and they don't recognize that this person has vulnerabilities that have been exploited. They look at it as this is an agreement between two people and it's totally okay, without really looking into that person in that situation and recognizing them for that they are an individual, they are a person, they have thoughts, they have feelings, they've had this past, this experience that is now being exploited and utilized by someone else for their own gain.
Buyers really are Buyers are a challenging issue. What we want to see happen in an ideal world is for buyers to be educated, that the person that they're buying does not enjoy what they're doing, that they are there because of vulnerabilities that are being exploited, that they're there by force, fraud, or coercion. And in an ideal world, when a buyer learns that, they would stop purchasing. That's not always the case, and if that is not what will work, then we would definitely want to see justice through means of prosecution.
And then we have to address this issue of demand. If there was not demand, right, even labor trafficking is an issue of supply and demand. Sex trafficking is an issue of supply and demand. And if we can educate people, and we can, and we are, so let me rephrase that, as we educate people about what is the truth of the purchase of a sex act, and the truth of mutuality, the truth of equality, then we get down to the human rights, dignity of every person. And it is so important that we not neglect addressing demand in our communities. So we have a Stopping Sexual Exploitation program where we have expanded what we had called our John School, which was a one-day course that then got watered down by some other programs that wanted to do it in 4 hours, do the class in 2 hours, and we were standing strong on our 8-hour class. Well, as we search best practices across the country and are seeking for a culture where people can be truly free, we found this course based out of Seattle, Washington called Stopping Sexual Exploitation, a program for men. And so we have trained facilitators who provide that class here in Kansas City, and it's a 10-week class. And it has changed from 20 years ago, where we would talk about, when we first brought the Buyer's Education program here, it was like, what is that? Why would you do that? To now, we're talking with prosecutors and they're saying, this is sexual misconduct at a minimum. For batterers intervention, we have a whole year-long class. Why would this only be 10 weeks? So we've made a lot of strides, and that's very, very exciting that now there's not just an understanding that we need a buyer's education program, but this understanding that a longer, extensive program is going to be more effective. So we're really excited right now to be able to be doing that in partnership with law enforcement, that as they do reverse stings, where they can set up false ads, right? And buyers respond to those ads, and as they respond, then they can sentence them to come to the class. Then as they go through the class, they have the opportunity to understand not just that they need to change their behavior, but everything that was behind that decision for that behavior in the beginning, and then what they need to do to completely turn everything around to where now they are part of the solution and no longer part of the problem.
Regarding OnlyFans, to me it's Instagram for porn. What I have heard and my understanding of OnlyFans is most of the individuals who enter in feel empowered, just like I did when I entered into my life. You know, you feel like, oh, I have control over this, I'm in my home, I'm safe. But then comes the subscribers, and your subscribers are asking you to do more and to do more and to contribute more acts. And eventually, in the end, all the individuals whom I know or have heard from, they have regret because they went further than they ever wanted to go. And once that's out, you can't take that back. You can't go back. So I see that being traumatic for a lot of people who don't understand necessarily the long-term repercussions that follow.
Traffickers are often referred to as pimps, daddies, or relationship-oriented term. At the core, a trafficker is someone who profits off another person who sells sex or sex acts through the use of fear, force, or coercion. A trafficker can be a female, but is typically a male through the ages of 18 to 34.
I always assumed that there was a kidnapping involved, it was a stranger, you had to be, transported across state lines, or there was some kind of, movement, I guess. So yeah, I had a lot of misconceptions, to be honest with you.
The person that exploited me the last time is how I will say that. I am a 51-year-old woman, and it happened when I was a teenager, and then it circled around again when I was in my 30s. It was somebody that I knew mutually, somebody that I had trusted, and somebody that used all of the tricks in the game as far as pimp school, I guess is what you would call it. So they groomed me very well. They brought me in slowly and was like, can you just help me write an ad? I have this other girl that I want to list. And from there it was, can you talk to this gal? She's a little rough around the edges. Can you make her softer so men would like her? And it just was one step further, Every couple weeks it was, can I push you a little further? Will you step into this? And so it felt comfortable, and you didn't even realize it until such time that it came to the day where things would turn, and they would come home and explain to me how they were fighting harder for our lives than I was, that they risked their life and I didn't, and why didn't I push as much as they did? And so next thing you know, I was advertising myself on the internet, and much to my surprise, the first time I went out and did that, I got beat for that as well. So there was really no right or wrong way to go. And one of the key elements that was also used was the isolation, pulling me away from my family, telling me how other people didn't care, informing me that they were going to be that one to take care of me, that they could, really understand me. So just the game of isolation and ripping you from all your supports.
I walked into a strip club the day before I turned 18 looking to be a waitress, and right away, right off the bat, no, you're not here to be a waitress, you're here to dance. And it started there. And there were multiple people whom exploited me, who sold me. So I met them in my place of employment. The most surprising one for me was a woman. The fact that a woman would sell another woman just really, still to this day, blows me away. Because as women, we're told we have to look out for one another. Yet you have this woman telling you, you have to leave or you lose your job. If I lose my job, I can't feed my child. If I can't feed my child, where am I at? I had to go.
The
Things that we can do to address traffickers when we're talking about sex trafficking is to make sure that they are being found by law enforcement, not just those that are being victimized, and also that we have legislation in place to help bring justice about. And that doesn't always just mean punishment, that could be restorative in nature as well.
That we want to be there. We might have wanted to initially, but after the fact, you know, it becomes a cycle and it's a trap. The best way for me to describe it is it's like a gang. You get beat in and you get beat out.
The rate of sex trafficking in the United States is difficult to determine due to the often hidden nature of this crime. It is estimated that the number of victims within the U.S. is between 15,000 to 50,000.
Vulnerabilities that I see most in my line of work are folks that have experienced not one episode of violence, but likely a lot of times a long history of violence that started in childhood, where they did not receive the supports that they needed in those moments. Maybe they did not have someone in their life that could provide them the support that they needed to learn and cope and deal with their situation and have success. So they wind up having these vulnerabilities, and some of those vulnerabilities might be just basic needs of shelter, food, clothing. It might be that they have never felt truly loved by another person in their entire life, or cared for, or protected, and or honored. And that vulnerability then is exploited by another person who appeals to that to utilize them for their own financial gain.
Vulnerabilities we see the most with the population we're working with is primarily with students in public schools, in community groups, sports groups, with youth groups, and what we are finding is the online component is one of the biggest vulnerabilities that our kids are facing. We're seeing the vulnerabilities that can be exploited by predators. So that might look like depression, isolation, loneliness, risky behaviors, suicidal ideations, self-harm. And when we are in schools doing presentations, we have students who are coming to us with a multitude of vulnerabilities that they're sharing that have led to them being vulnerable, to them being groomed, and or to them being victimized.
Research indicates a stark divide in gender, race, ethnicity, and class of those who are victimized. There is an increased risk of sex trafficking victimization in the United States for Black and Latina girls and women, for those with disabilities, for those below the poverty threshold, and for those in the foster care system.
Preventing sex trafficking requires us to increase awareness of unsupervised online activities, red flags, and risk factors with youth, as well as increasing social supports for underserved populations.
So when I was leaving for college, I want to say that was probably where my only vulnerabilities lied, because I am somebody who had a fairly privileged upbringing, and like nobody really would have looked at me and said that, yeah, you would have been trafficked. I didn't have the outward appearances of having any of those vulnerabilities, except for the LGBT one that no one knew about because I wasn't out about it or open. But when I went to college, I went from a very small town to a bigger city. The town was about 250 people, and I went to a town of about 50,000 people. So to me, that was a huge jump. And I had that small town friendliness of like trusting everybody. And then I was, kind of disheartened to find out that you can't trust everybody. And befriended somebody in the marching band of all places. And so there's really not much about my story that I ended up, I was a privileged person that ended up getting trafficked out of the marching band. Who does that? But there are some hidden points in my story. As an LGBT person who didn't really have a very strong connection with my parents or my mom at that time, there was a lot going on, a lot of mistrust, not feeling connected and being able to talk to my parents about things. left me feeling alone and left me feeling like there was something missing. And so I went looking for that. And a lot of people don't see that as a vulnerability. But in my professional career and talking with youth who have been trafficked, that's a big part of what leads them into the life of human trafficking, is just feeling unloved and not feeling supported as their whole person.
The risk factors in Kansas City, I feel, again, I work with the homeless population, and oftentimes people correlate human trafficking either with persons from another country or with youth. But the truth of it is, it's happening no matter what the age group is. And so I see it a lot within my homeless population, just the things that they deal with, which is kind of why I went into the avenue that I'm in. I feel like there are people that are often overlooked. The trauma of sexual exploitation began for most of them as children, and it's never been identified. They unfortunately sometimes get treated as the unwanted people, and I feel we're all wanted people. And so, you know, just to reach out and grab them and allow them to feel wanted, I think is a huge step in the right direction.
So for a lot of the kids that I work with, they identify from coming from foster families or being in foster care. A lot of them identify coming from homes where they were abused or neglected, and that in and of itself are vulnerabilities and things that cause somebody to go looking for something that's missing inside their hearts. There are a lot of pushes and pulls that go into human trafficking, and I always usually look to my foster kids to tell me what those are. Being Black in America right now is something that is very difficult, and it's something that a lot of my kids in foster care talk about their experiences and end up, because of racism, they end up trying to find a better life and a better family in the underworld, which is a gateway to human trafficking in a lot of ways. Or they just don't see themselves as being worthy. And so they find a group of people who says they're worthy, and then they end up in an exploitive part of the crappy part of humanity. So as being, speaking from an LGBT person, that is probably one of the biggest vulnerabilities that our youth face right now, especially in this part of the country. And it's because that we are not loved, we're not accepted, we are not an accepted part of society. I think the world is currently tolerating us as we make our way in just existing. But just that in itself, knowing that you really don't have a family that stands by you no matter what, even if you come out as gay, that will lead you down a path of destruction very easily. And so, to me, that's one of the biggest vulnerabilities.
You know, you start with Instagram and you see their hashtags. Like, it is a cesspool for breeding. Like the hashtag 304, that represents hoe. Hashtag 304 shit, hoe shit. Hashtag PGO, pimp game on. Hashtag HGO, hoe game on. It is a market to get these individuals with a pimp or in to be trafficked. They use the DMs to go in and get children. One of my own children has received messages from someone trying to be her sugar daddy when she was 13 years old. There's no way to control it. It makes the net to get people into this life just huge. It's how do you shut down the internet? You can't, you don't. So yeah, I see a lot of problems and a lot of scary things coming from this.
Survival sex is the exchanging of sex for primary needs such as food, water, and housing. If the individual is under 18, it is illegal in the United States.
Well, if you're in a home and it's not a stable environment, what are you going to do? You're going to flee the home. When you flee the home, where do you go? You either go to a friend's house, and that might last for a while, or you go to the street. And eventually, a lot of these runaways end up on the streets because they don't have a way of making money. They don't have a way to make means to an end. You know, if they're minors, they can't consent. Even if it's consensual, it's non-consensual. So it becomes a cycle, and we have to break that cycle. We have to address all of these issues, and we have to have things in place for these vulnerable youth. We have to have homeless shelters. We have to have, you know, people whom specifically can meet these children's needs.
I think with at-risk youth, the thing that I would want to share with them is allowing them to understand the complications and the dangers out there in the world. Oftentimes, I can remember being a teenager. I was that teenager at 16 years old. I became homeless. I was living in my car. I was using survival sex to get through the day, to get fed, to have some place to shower. So I understand some of the things that they're up against. So my best thing that I would probably share with them is just how to navigate understanding when somebody means you harm and when somebody is actually there to help. I know that one of the major things with a lot of children, a lot of youth that get out there, complications with home, maybe their sexual identity is different than what maybe their Christian household will allow and things like that. So they kind of get shoved out and they feel like they have no place. And so just really to get them to understand the manipulation and the tactics that other people use to convince them that they're loved, when actually what is happening is they're being used for somebody else's gain. So in my opinion, that is a very important piece to educate them on.
Addressing vulnerabilities that youth face, that's like taking on that whole system of services that we've created in our society and asking yourself, where do I fit in? And I go back to, when I was a teenager and I was just trying to help others like me. I was just trying to reach out and be a friend. I think about who really changed my life. It was people who didn't step into my life because they were paid to. They stepped into my life because they wanted to build authentic relationship, and they got to know me. They sought to understand me, and they really pushed for me to be able to succeed. And so I think when we're looking at the vulnerabilities that are in our community, we need to start looking at who's right around us. And if there's nobody there, if everything's good there, start looking at the organizations in your community that are serving kids, or even volunteering at schools, taking whatever skill you have and looking at how can I now share this with somebody else.
Out as a survivor of trafficking was, in the beginning, I really didn't think of it as that big of a deal because I was just talking about my life and who I was. What I discovered after I did it was that there was quite a bit of backlash, which I didn't understand, or it just kind of seemed that once I identified myself as a survivor, all of the accomplishments didn't really seem to matter. I was dubbed as, you were involved in prostitution, or some sort of criminal act, rather than a human being that had accomplished 2 bachelor's degrees, a master's degree, and nothing else really seemed to matter. And so that whole process eventually kind of engulfed my entire life, and it became an identity, because I acted a certain way. I just kind of threw myself into what it meant to be a survivor, and it really wasn't a happy life. I did speaking engagements because I felt like I had to. I wanted to make sure that the message got across, but what I learned was that survivor voices were not respected, and were not really truly a part of the conversation at that time.
I had been out for so long that I had a girlfriend whom had also gotten out of the industry, and I kept seeing her posting, about how empowered she was becoming through her own leadership, working within our organization, which I mentioned as Veronica's Voice. And after a few years of that, I thought, I have to get in on this. So I kind of started with In the Words of Survivors, and I do slam poetry, so I'd get up and, lay it out, and it was just a natural progression from there. It's just, there's so much more to be done, so I just kept going, and I don't plan on stopping.
During that journey, and being turned down for jobs because I was too open about my own experience. People didn't think I could handle what it meant to be a youth worker. I was stigmatized by my sexual orientation, by just being out and open about my story in general. They just said, well, you're not going to be able to differentiate between the work that you're doing and your identity. So a lot of doors were closed as a result of that. So that kind of goes back to the troubles of me speaking out. And then I think it was just seeking out other survivor leaders online. I started to find other people who are involved, who wanted to be leaders in the movement, who were already doing the work on a large scale. And I befriended Rebecca Bender and started engaging with Rachel Lloyd's group, GEMS, and both of them got me involved in my first conference in 2015. I went to Charleston and kind of discovered myself and what it meant to be a survivor leader. And then I was just launched, and my passion became, I can make this. I can make it. I'm not gonna just be a survivor and not be able to share my story and do what I love to do. I can actually do it.
My transition into leadership was a bumpy road. I had other people encouraging me and informing me I was a leader. I've been told by my pastor that I'm what's called a reluctant leader. He said he's the same. In social settings, people often don't know that about me because I am a leader and I've been in that role now for a few years. I present myself pretty well. It took a long time to do that, but I say that because it's not always comfortable for me to have people looking to me to be that leader, but I know it's a position that I've kind of been placed in. So I embrace it, but somewhat uncomfortably sometimes.
People, when we get out, you know, there's always that question of what's next, where do I go? More programs, more awareness of the programs that we do have in place, that needs to be everywhere. They need to know that there are places for them that will welcome them with open arms and they won't be stigmatized there, and along those lines, I guess.
There is a loyalty that victims feel towards their traffickers, and this is based upon the situations and the manipulation that the traffickers put on the victims, so the victims feel like they owe their traffickers to remain quiet.
The trauma bond that happens between the victim and the pursuer it's the key to everything. It's what keeps people going back. It's why people stand there and say, I don't understand why they go back to their abuser, because they've never understood trauma bonding. Once that happens, you're in a place where you feel so low, you feel like there is nobody else, and they step in. And although they're the ones creating all the danger and harm and hurt that's coming to you, they craft it in a way that you don't believe that. You believe other people are forcing them to make these choices. I can remember there were times that I would be beaten, and then later it was explained to me that that was to show somebody else not to step out of line, because I was what was considered the bottom bitch, and so that's really the top of the line, even though it suggests otherwise. Or, you know, the madam, it's kind of how he also utilized me. So if he were to punish me, then they knew it was pretty extreme. So there were often times that I was punished just for that reason. But it was laid out to me in such a way that I was doing a service. And so that, you know, after it was over with, I was supposed to feel good about the fact that I had just taken this beating. It's just a really horrible psychological game that they are masters at. And that's how it was worked on me. And so even after it's over with, you don't want to leave them. You still care about them. You still want the best for them. So it is really hard after you've left it to still not want to think about them and hope that they can do better.
It's really hard to trust someone who will come in and exploit you and then arrest you. I didn't trust the police. I didn't feel safe with the police. I felt like they exploited us further when I was in the life. I did. we're getting arrested. Why are the buyers not?
The thing that made me feel safe enough to leave the situation is going to sound a little ironic, but it was being arrested and put in jail. Because once I was arrested and taken over to, I was arrested in Kansas City, Kansas, which is Wyandotte County, and they're a unified government. So they can arrest you on what might be a city charge in Kansas City on the Missouri side, but on their side they can make it a capital or state charge if they choose to. So I was looking at prison time. But knowing that the police were watching me made me feel safe, if that even makes sense. Because what happened is, like, one of my first court dates, that my attorney brought me to the side and explained to me how they had been following up and still pinging my phone number on the internet because my pimp or my trafficker, however, whatever you want to label him as, I wasn't allowed to not work anymore. But since they were watching and they had that information, then I could go back to him and let him know they're still watching me. So it wasn't worth it for him to have me on the internet because I could bring in more trouble. So being arrested was the best thing that happened.
Victims sometimes are fearful coming to law enforcement and have a lack of trust in law enforcement with the situations that they are in. We have to get past that in order to further the investigation.
You need money. You need money to leave. You have to continue to go back to make money. Another barrier is you get so used to being in those platforms that it becomes more difficult to walk away because that's familiar to you. Whereas, when you're out, it's unfamiliar. So everything ahead of you, you don't know what's gonna happen, and that's scary. And it's almost scarier than it is being in the club or on the streets, because at least there you have some semblance of routine. But when you walk away, that's all taken away, and you have to build new routines, and you have to basically rebuild your life. So there are a plethora of complications that come along with that.
The barriers to leaving a situation of sexual exploitation or human trafficking, the number one overall arching concern is self-preservation. You're afraid you're going to be hurt. There are threats. There are threats to harm people around you. There are threats to separate you from your children or to make you look bad for the state so your children are taken from you. It's just all these tactics of what would happen if you did try to leave. And there's always those occasions where you did run off, you thought you had enough, and you would run off, and he always found you, and the beating that you got was far worse than the last time. So just the fear of being caught if you did try to leave, that was always a concern as well.
I didn't leave for myself. My stage partner was murdered on Christmas Day in front of her daughter, with her daughter in the back seat. And I wasn't gonna die there. So I worked my way out.
There's no trust left. And if you don't have trust, you won't go to people and ask for help. You won't accept the help when they get them. So understanding that the process is long-term. Don't expect results from somebody after 8 weeks. Or if you've seen improvement after 3 months and then they start backsliding again, that's not a time to walk away from them. That's a time to embrace them more. Because one of the tactics that we learn is you push people away so you don't have to handle what's really going on. And I can speak for myself. There were layers of being able to heal. And the first one was being able to accept that I was a victim. For myself, being a woman and growing up, you're told that you're supposed to have this certain level of independence and be able to take care of yourself and not fall prey to certain things. And so when you find out that you have, there's a huge humility that doesn't allow you to let people know what has happened or what's going on or how you're feeling. And so you kind of keep that bottled up. And I think until you can understand, no, I was victimized and this did happen to me. Because if you don't, you also take on the responsibility of everything and you compile it all into, what did I do wrong? Why is this my fault? Why did I let this happen to me? So allowing myself to be a victim first, it was hard, but that was absolutely the first step for me. Once I can recognize that, yeah, this is just horrible, and I didn't make these choices. Somebody made these choices for me. I really didn't want, to lose a little piece of my soul with every dollar that I took in for somebody else's gain. So I accepted that I was a victim, and then I realized that there was something past that. And so that's when I became a survivor. But it's stages, and you have to allow people that room and follow their lead. Don't set expectations for somebody. That's one thing that I don't like about some of the programs we have. They're kind of based on, 12-month or 18-month, but you don't know the severity and the layers of hurt and harm and trauma that somebody's gone through. So please don't set expectations on time limits on when they're going to be healed.
So I think the first thing is we need to decriminalize the victim. The second thing is that has to be partnered with quality services in our community, because the challenge that the court system or law enforcement have is, what do you want me to do with this person? All I can do is just return them right back to where they came from. And that doesn't solve anything for them, and it does not end the crime, right? And so that's where having solid victim services and quality care and access to jobs, which is part of the decriminalization, access to be able to rent, which is part of the decriminalization, right? Access to be able to get your own ID. Sometimes they actually need to completely change their identity to get safe from traffickers. And just all of those things that need to happen, the courts are really positioned to be able to help, but they are not victim service providers, right? So we have to have the quality services being developed in the community as well.
Local initiatives that we can focus on are getting knowledge out to the public, really pushing forward human trafficking, what's available for victims, the support that's out there, and just a general understanding of what to look for as indicators of a trafficking situation.
The initiatives that we're working on right now on a statewide level is some statutory changes that would require mandatory human trafficking education and awareness, which I think is fantastic. Some other initiatives that we're working on is developing a medical forensic flow sheet that is specific for human trafficking. Many of our sexual assault nurse examiners are using sexual assault flow sheets, which are not really appropriate for someone who's experiencing human trafficking. This is a different kind of violence. This is a different kind of intensity that they deal with, different problem set of issues and threats and violence and nature of the relationship between the trafficker and the victim. And so, building a guide for our sexual assault nurse examiners so they can provide the right kind of care rather than just deferring to a flow sheet that is maybe halfway appropriate. So that's one of the initiatives that we're working on right now is to provide that guidance to our sexual assault nurse examiners in the state of Missouri, and hopefully disseminate that out across the country as well with education along with it.
There are some great initiatives locally. One thing that the general person can do is to find out about the organizations that exist locally in your area. Research those organizations. Find out what lines up with your passion, with your worldview, and join that organization. Get behind the work that they're doing, whether that is with your time, your talent, or your treasure. Join what is happening in your community. One of the exciting new things in our community is the opening of Christine's Place on Independence Avenue. Christine McDonald is a well-known survivor leader. She has had a vision to open this center as a drop-in crisis center where they can meet women that are being used in prostitution here locally, right where they are, and help them with clothing or medical or just encouragement, just relationship, being able to take a shower, wash clothes, things that they might not otherwise have access to. There is no box I think is another important thing for us to remember. There's no box when it comes to predators, when it comes to buyers, when it comes to victims. So thinking outside of the box always, and just really engaging with what's happening in the community. Pay attention for events that are coming up. Engage with organizations that are on the ground doing the work.
The community can help us by becoming aware of human trafficking, the signs, the symptoms, not just the big ones, but the subtle ones. The other thing they can do is to take a moment to sit down with someone that they've got a red flag on or that they're worried about, to sit down and have a conversation with them person to person and say, I am a safe person for you. What do you need right now? And just turning all of their attention to what that person needs, and then activating the community resources that are most appropriate for that person to meet those needs and those concerns.
The community can help us the most by, number one, being engaged in the battle. Together, we can do so much more. And if we realize that we don't want Kansas City metro, we don't want any metro, any rural area to be friendly to traffickers or to buyers. So that means that we need to increase our own awareness, the education level, and then be sharing that information with others. That can happen through technology, which is a great use of technology, so that we're sharing that information with others. Talk to the people in your sphere of influence. And the reality is that the majority of buyers are men. So we need good men to speak up. We need good men to be better men and to be vocal about this issue.
They can take action. Instead of just saying they recognize the problem, you can take action. Because if you recognize it and you turn your back, you're complicit. You're complicit. Volunteer, educate yourselves, help remove the stigma. Don't look at us as whores or garbage or a worthless individual. We are people. It's really that simple. They need to be involved. We need more support.
For the communities to support survivors, I think the greatest piece is the education piece. I think here in Kansas City that we're doing a great job of getting the education out there and getting people to understand what human trafficking really looks like. I think a lot of people have the idea that human trafficking, again, is people not born in the United States, people brought in here, which there is a significant number of people that go through trafficking that avenue. But the sexual exploitation and whatnot, it starts at an early age here. It's rampant. It's not singular. So I think really understanding and educating the community about it and what it looks like, what it really, really looks like, not the airbrush versions that they pick up on little memes and different blips on social media. I think that's where it starts. In my opinion, I think educating the children and parents of children is a foundational place to start.
Always believe a survivor. Always believe them. Like, that's big.
The message that I would want victims to know is that there are people that can help. Law enforcement is there to help them get out of the situation that they are in. There are groups that are there to support them with resources, and that the situation that they are currently in does not have to be what their life is like. The message that I would want survivors to know is that, one, we're proud of them for coming forward. That's a difficult thing to do. And for them to know that once a case is done, that it doesn't end there, that there are resources out there for them to continue living a safe and healthy lifestyle.
I would like to tell anyone who has experienced human trafficking that it is incredibly scary to disclose and to let someone know what's been going on in your world. Incredibly scary to reveal some of the things that they've experienced. It's even scarier to think about what might happen down the road. Many times a person, like it takes a lot of courage to discuss those kinds of things and to have a conversation with someone, because you don't know how they're going to react, and you don't know if they're going to follow up. You don't know if they're going to provide you the services that you need. Know that we are working on educating, everyone in our communities so that they will have the right kind of response. And if you meet someone that doesn't have that education yet, keep reaching, keep looking, and don't be afraid to keep reaching out for assistance and help, because eventually you are going to find that person that has all those resources in their back pocket and will be able to send you in the right direction to make sure that your needs are met.
I want victims and survivors to know that they're valuable, that there is nothing that someone can do to them. There's nothing that they have done to themselves. There's nothing that anyone could do to them that would ever change their actual value. And so to recognize that it's not their fault. They've often been told, I was told that it was my behavior. I was told that if I told anyone, I would destroy our family. We are often told a lot of lies. And so learning to break free from the lies, learning new behavior is easy. Breaking free from shame is very difficult. So I would want anyone to understand the value that they actually possess within themselves.
It provides me hope when I see a client set goals for themselves and achieve those goals. So maybe when I'm working with them in an exam, they set a goal for 5 minutes, I'm going to stay grounded and use some grounding techniques. And I watch them achieve that goal. For others, I find out that they are going to go for a job interview, like their first real job interview next week. And they're setting that goal for themselves, and I get to watch them achieve. That provides me hope to see that growth and that progression and those goals being met for them.
I find hope in seeing that prevention is possible. When we look at the problem of human trafficking, we can feel like it is this huge tidal wave that is ready to consume us, and it feels like so often that we're standing in that ocean with the tidal wave washing over us with toothpicks, trying to flick the water away. And that is why we want to cut off the source of where that problem is happening. So if we can start to give tools to our youth, if they can understand what a predator will do to try to lure them in, to try to gain their trust, and that aha moment happens where they go, oh, wait, I bet that 16-year-old guy that I thought was so cute and awesome that's messaging me might actually be a predator. Hold on, I need to think about this for a minute. I need to talk to a safe, caring adult in my community that I can bounce these ideas off of. So the hope that someone can recognize grooming in the process or before it happens so that they can help others, and seeing us as a community care more about this issue brings me hope.
Where I find hope, first I find hope in God and knowing there's a higher power. I find hope in my friends and family members who I know will love me unconditionally. Where I find my fuel for the passion for this is in other survivors. My sister survivors, my brother survivors, transgender survivors. I just know seeing their resiliency and their courage gives me hope to continue every day.
I find hope, and I have to have hope that by raising awareness, other people will come to understand that, like I've said a million times, we're people too. Remove the stigma and just keep going. One foot in front of the other, baby step if you have to. Just keep going.
I find hope. I find hope every morning that I wake up, because I honestly am a person who feels like today is just another opportunity that I have to go out and make a change. Whether that's more change within myself, whether that's connecting with somebody to help them make a change, that's my hope. Every day that I wake up, if the sun's not shining, I remind myself, you can go shine for somebody else. Bring that into them. my hope is that I've made it through. I'm not sure why. I'm no more worthy than somebody else. And so as long as I have breath in me, then if I'm given another opportunity the next day, that's my hope. And I just keep living off of that.
I am hopeful because
prevention is possible.
Justice is possible.
Healing is possible.
I am hopeful because Kansas City has a leadership in place to end sex trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. With your help, it ends with us.
Thank you, survivor leaders, for the passion and expertise you provide to the greater Kansas City area.